Hey, this is Benjamin Boyce, and welcome to the Quarantine Conversations series that is just a continuation of my normal series and my normal life, but because we have a theme and an alliteration, we got to take advantage of it. We just have to do that. That's my MO. Today's guest is Colin Wright, who is a scientist who has been studying social insects and for the last year and some months has been speaking about biological sex on Twitter, which has got him a lot of attention because for some reason that's a very hot topic nowadays. In this interview, Colin speaks to me about a recent Wall Street Journal article that he published along with Dr. Emma Hilton about the need to identify the reality of biological sex and how denying that reality actually has a bunch of consequences. And as you might imagine, he suffered some consequences for publishing such an audacious article in a national media outlet. So we talk about that. We also talk about his changing attitude towards academia and how somebody like him, along with somebody like a bunch of other people who want to pursue certain questions or who are investigating or invested in investigating reality, don't necessarily fit anymore within academia. And there are certain mechanisms within academia that are straining these people from it, both post facto and even pre facto, before the fact and after the fact. So this is a great conversation. Colin's a great guy, and he's going to be moving from the east to the west, so wish him luck in that endeavor. Here's Colin Wright. What do we want to talk about? We just want to rap about biology?
I guess we could, yeah, just stuff that's been going on. I guess I had the Wall Street Journal article, I had the canceling attempt, I had just general goings on, I guess.
That wasn't, I don't know. I think it was the New York Times article.
It was Wall Street Journal, the one I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how's the reaction to that, broadly speaking?
It's hard to even say in one word because at first it was extremely positive. And I was shocked. I was like, wow, this is like 90, 95, 98% positive. And then you can really see how Twitter's sort of in these different bubbles because one person a couple days later retweeted it, and then it just sort of, once it caught some structure into the woke Twitter, it just took off, and all of a sudden I was just receiving just a fire hose of hate. And then so I was just blocking and muting people like crazy. It's like, where is this coming from? Like somebody quote tweeted me somewhere. And then that sort of died down, and then it was fine again. And then again, like a few weeks ago, someone quote tweeted me again, and I was getting tons of hate again. So it came in waves. So overall, it's hard to say how it was pretty balanced, I think, at the end of the praise and hate for it. But it was definitely a wild ride for sure.
The problem with social media is that it blows out of all proportion I guess, not the strength of the argument, but the strength of the people behind the argument. Like, when you have these crazy statements that get 30,000, 140,000 likes on them, like there was that weird statement, I'm going to misquote it, but like yesterday or the day before, somebody made a weird statement about how the landlord doesn't provide you anything. It's the architect who built the house that is providing you the house. And it doesn't make any actual sense what they're saying, but because it punches into some drive for free rent that all of us have a little bit of, it goes wildly out of proportion. So whenever there's a topic where people are specifically conditioned to have a certain response to it within these different pockets, then you can't really tell how strong that response is to your specific argument or your specific point, so much as their condition to anything that lands within like an area.
Yeah, and it was definitely evident with my piece with just the canned responses. I had hundreds of responses that were essentially just the same or linked to the same article that talks about gender identity instead of biological sex, and failure to even engage in points, just pointing out that die transphobe is like probably the most typical message I got for the entire time.
Do you think die has like a special acronymic meaning that could be like construed as good for you, like digest enzymes?
One can hope, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I definitely reported a lot of people. over
Oh,
the
really?
past month or so. Well, yeah, just because I know, just not because I particularly am actually afraid that someone's gonna knock on my door and harass me in person or attempt anything, but it's just there should be, I guess, some consequences for a death threat on Twitter. So I didn't hear back from Twitter that they've even closed any of those cases, but
Yeah.
yeah, just a quick
What do you
report.
think, off the top of your head, what's some of the criticisms that stuck with you, or like a moment like where you realized like there was more depth to the topic or the discussion that you had previously missed after writing that article?
I can honestly say that I have yet to read anything that really engaged with our article. The pieces that sort of ostensibly made an attempt to do that, they would begin by talking loosely about biological sex, and there'd just be like a sentence in there that would sort of pivot, and then it would be talking about gender, and then the rest of the piece would be about gender, and then they would just be talking completely past me at that point.
Mm.
And so yeah, I've
Hmm.
yet to actually engage with someone who's, I thought, made any point that really landed in any big way.
Mm.
And so I'm still, me and Emma are still waiting for something we can actually dig our teeth into. We're really waiting and hoping to make this just be a dialogue. We don't want it to just be, a volley. We did our best not to be hyperbolic and encouraging some sort of exchange of ideas here. So hopefully someone's writing something maybe that'll be forthcoming that's sort of a measured response that we could then respond to. That'd be ideal for us anyway, because we don't want to just cast things out and then cut line and then
Yeah.
move on. We'd like to start a conversation, and if we think that getting a piece in such a high profile place as the Wall Street Journal, this is one of the first pieces I think that really made it into such a big newspaper that has the potential to start a much larger conversation. Whereas before, these conversations were happening in Quillette and other smaller magazines and personal blogs. But it was the first, I guess, mainstream article specifically dealing with that.
For the audience members who haven't read your article yet, and I will link it in the description, could you give us an overview of the basic points that you were making, or the ground you were staking?
Yeah. So there have been a lot of articles that have been published in Nature, Scientific American, the New York Times, that basically make some sort of argument or hint at the fact that biological sex is either a spectrum or it's a social construct entirely, that there's no objective things that we can call male or female, or they just cast us into a lot of doubt. They just kind of make it kind of murky and say, oh, it's just really, really complex. No one really knows what's going on here. And so me and Emma Hilton, Dr. Emma Hilton, she's the co-author on the article with me, we just think that there's a lot of sort of fuzzy thinking in that realm. And there's a lot of consequences that flow from people denying biological sex is a real thing. And so we basically point out the typical argument that's made by these articles, and it's all very similar. It usually starts out with discussing biological sex, and it digs into intersex conditions as sort of this fuzzy boundary between male and female, and it suggests that since some individuals have, sort of maybe a mixture of male and female sex organs, or incomplete development in some areas, or chromosomal differences here and there, that somehow this calls into question the actual categories of male and female themselves. And so we just point out that, while intersex conditions are real and very rare, and it may be the fact that some very few individuals, some, less than 0.02% of individuals can be considered sexually ambiguous, that's just not the case for basically 4,999 out of 5,000 individuals, where they're unambiguously male or female. We also point out the fact that most people, trans individuals who are using these intersex arguments, they are not intersex themselves. Most trans people are unambiguously male or female. They fall into one of those two clear categories. And so pointing to intersex conditions isn't in any way giving them the ability to actually, nothing about that calls their sex into question. And then we sort of went into a few areas where the denial of biological sex is harmful to both women, the LGBT community, and then also children. So women, because they fought hard for their sex-based rights, they have their own separate sports leagues, their own separate prisons, etc. That if we just let people self-ID, then it's going to be basically impossible to enforce these sex-based rights, these laws that have been made on the basis of sex differences. For the LGBT community, there's been a lot of, I've heard you talk about the cotton ceiling, and for people who don't know, that's just basically the statement that it's somehow transphobic if, say, a lesbian would refuse to date a trans woman simply because they have a penis, they have complete male anatomy, because they kind of perceive homosexuality not as being same-sex attracted, but as same-gender identity attracted. And so if a trans woman, if a lesbian were to say that she wasn't interested in dating a trans woman because they're male and they have a penis, then they're all of a sudden transphobic. And this isn't just how science looks at sexuality too. Yeah, some people may be attracted to individuals based on their identity or something, even though that's a trait that you can't physically see. It's just a brain state. This is just generally not how we understand sexual attraction to be working. It's based on if they're perceived to be male or female. And then for children, we looked at the harms of sort of what does it mean if we blur the lines of biological sex, and we think that this could lead children to sort of be confused possibly about what their gender non-conforming behavior, mannerisms, personality traits might sort of mean about how they think about their biological sex. So if you're a really tomboyish girl, could this lead you to be maybe confused about, if you're maybe just a boy trapped in a girl's body? We use references to Lisa Littman's paper on rapid onset gender dysphoria to sort of bolster that. But that's sort of broadly what our article covered, just those points. And then it sort of chastised a lot of the outlets like the New York Times and especially the scientific journal Nature for perpetuating this. And we just think it's extremely irresponsible for these scientific organizations that we're supposed to be able to trust for accurate information. And they're just sort of pandering politically, we think, to this certain ideology that is just wants everyone to throw up their hands and just not acknowledge the fact that most people's sex is pretty unambiguous, and it's a real thing, and we do know what biological sex is. We're not that confused about it. There's edge cases, and we can talk about those, but by and large, we know what biological sex is.
It's amazing that science has penetrated the secrets of the atom, and in the process, forgotten how to tell the sexes apart.
Oh, I know. Yeah, where were these people 5-10 years ago who were biologists? I've argued with a PhD biologist recently who was claiming that they had expertise in sex development, and they're trying to say that neurons are somehow part of the definition of biological sex. If you were to change the neurons and leave your primary sex traits, your genitals and gonads in place, that's not going to change your sex no matter what type of brain state you happen to have. And I just can't believe I have these conversations with people who seem just to...
If you're having these conversations, why do you think they're so invested into it? What do you have any insight into why they're trying to obfuscate something that's pretty obvious?
I mean, it's hard to get over the idea that it's sort of an ideological component driving some of these. It seems nice in a way just to maybe just sort of throw your hands up a little bit and say that sex is really complex, to maybe ease the dysphoria that people might be having with their biological sex, and that way no one can actually tell them, to tell a trans person that they're not the sex that they might identify as. And it's my position and Emma's too, that we're not the types that are going to go out there we're not looking to find trans people and tell them that, like, oh, you're not really the sex you claim you are. Like, that is so not where we're coming from. Like, I'm more than happy to use people's pronouns that they wish for us to use. But it's just when things go a little further and they start trying to change laws, and then that's sort of, there needs to be an adult in the room to some degree to say, like, wait a minute, like, we can't make this into law. Like, this is something we might socially accept. Like, I'm willing to socially accept a trans woman as a woman, and I'm not going to try to make them feel uncomfortable in any way. But once we start actually believing these things, that's where I think people need to start putting their foot down and drawing a line. And I just see a lot of scientists, biologists who aren't willing to stand up to that line, who are just overtly crossing it.
And it was either before or after your article published that I believe somebody came after you and said something, not even mean on Twitter, but kind of tried to rally a mob to get you not hired, right? They tried to pre-cancel your career as a scientist, right?
Yeah. Actually, I think that was after the article had been published. That was a guy named Kevin Bird, who's just very much one of those activist types. And that was on a response to a tweet that I did that was, it was in Sweden, I think there was a 1,500% increase in the number of adolescents that were reporting to gender clinics. Mm-hmm. And so my tweet was, I quoted a bit from the article, and then the only thing I wrote, so my contribution to the tweet was just, I said 2 words, social contagion, which was sort of tipping the hat to Lisa Lippman's paper, which had a whole thing on social contagion theory. And this is, it's looking back on it, like, I can see how, if people don't know social contagion theory, that it's actually an academic field that people are studying, that people could misinterpret what that means. And it got retweeted by like Ann Coulter to 2 million people. And so so it just took off, and then people were just quote tweeting it. And then all of a sudden the context was just like taken out of my mouth from me. And so I ended up deleting it. I don't know if that was a good decision or not, but I just didn't want this tweet without my context just to be, done with as people would like to do. And I do think social contagion, which is basically just the fact that social factors could be playing a role. We see more people, adolescents, coming out as trans if their friend circle has a lot of individuals that are also trans. So there's some sort of social component, some sort of trendiness, I suppose, to this. Now, I'm not saying this is the only thing that could be contributing to people that are, the adolescents coming out as trans. It could also be partially what a lot of the trans activists like to say it is, and that's, increased social acceptance of trans identities, and that could be playing a role too. Mm-hmm. My point was that, and after subsequent sort of back and forth with people, is I think we need to explore all of these potential explanations. Mm-hmm. And the consensus from sort of the trans rights activist part was that, no, you can't look at the social contagion hypothesis because people in the past had said that homosexuality was a social contagion, and that there's this history behind using that word, or saying it was contagious to some degree. And then I'd point out the fact that, well, let's say maybe if there was a component, let's say if people being gay did sort of run in circles, well, what are the consequences of that, of it maybe being trendy? I don't think it is, but the consequences of that would be, oh no, you kissed someone of the same sex and you found out that you weren't really that interested, and no harm done. Like, there's no harm to anybody experimenting, sexually that way. Whereas there are potential harms with individuals being convinced that they're trans when they might not be, because this is often sort of puts people down a pathway to more invasive treatments such as puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, or irreversible surgeries, permanent changes in your voice, and these are things that I think we should be worried about to some degree. So I don't think you can quite compare saying that the social contagion type thing to homosexuals and the trans situation are identical. And I think it's dangerous not to explore any potential social factors that could be playing a role, especially when there's some suggestive evidence that it could be there. More studies need to be done on it, but it's my understanding.
Well, it's interesting because maybe I'm simplifying things too much, but it was the move of construing gender as a social construct that was, in some part, I would think, is what led us to where we are now, where you can just create whatever gender you want to be. If that's the case, then it seems a little defensive for them not to want to discuss the social impacts of how this stuff is going around. If it's a social construct but not a social contagion, you can't have one and not the other.
One of their main criticisms too, because they criticize Lisa Lippman's study because they say that she only interviewed parents and didn't interview the children themselves. Which that's a valid criticism. I mean, I don't think it's worth nothing. I think it's still publishable data. But then now Lisa Lippman is doing. She launched another study that was trying to ask the children themselves, a big survey, and then that survey was bombarded by trans activists just submitting false stuff, and just to swamp the survey and make it completely unusable, which goes against their narrative that they were actually interested in the real evidence from this actual group that they're interested in. And so I know now that Lisa Lippman's trying to launch it again, but has a lot more different ways she's going about it, where it wouldn't be susceptible to this bombardment by activists trying just to shut her whole research system down. So what they say in one context doesn't really match their actions. If they're actually interested in the data that they say they're interested in, or criticizing her on the grounds that she only interviewed parents and not children, if that was the issue, then why are they bombarding her new study that does exactly what they say they want to be done? So yeah, the policing is pretty intense for sure.
Do you have, because your research has to do with social insects, have you seen any social contagion? I think we've explored that a little bit in our first interview. But do you see, are you aware of, in the animal kingdom, certain sorts of social patterns that give rise to group dynamics that could be detrimental or positive for the group?
Yeah, I'm not sure what species of monkey. There might be in some sort of baboons, and you do see it in other species as well. But you'll get, like one example is like food washing behavior. I think there's a monkey that started just like washing their food in a stream, and this actually sort of helped it by cleaning the food before they ate it. And then you can see how other monkeys observed them do it, and they started washing their food too. And now all the monkeys in these tribes are washing their food in certain ways. So you can see how just sort of how behavioral trends. I guess you could call sort of like almost like a meme or some sort of like cultural evolution takes place within animal society as well. I'm not aware of any of it taking place in sort of social insects and things. It's usually going to be probably more in the primates and sort of mammals that have more of a the brains that are capable of that type of learning and stuff. But yeah, you definitely see that sort of social contagion. And
has this inspired you to maybe change the purview of your own research, like the last, I guess, 6 months or so?
So I have been getting very interested in looking at human sort of personality, behavioral differences, collective behavioral differences of humans. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do that because moving back to California, my contract here at Penn State is up basically, and so I've had a lot of difficulty securing any sort of academic job afterwards. I've applied to maybe 100 positions and got about 3 phone interviews, and that's about as far as it went. So I'll still be applying to some academic positions, but unfortunately, I've heard back from a few after my Wall Street Journal article who expressed there was chairs of some biology departments, and they expressed interest in potentially hiring me on as a faculty because they liked my writing and they liked the way I engage with people. But then they both said, which was pretty astonishing to me, and since I've talked to other academics, they were just sort of blown away, that they said that even though they'd be interested in recruiting me, that they think the HR department would probably almost certainly block the hiring just based on my social media, just because it would be sort of a liability. They didn't say it was for sure, but they said they were near certain that it would be very tough. Which, and other people I've talked to, they said it was that really, it shocked them, because in their experience, HR was only there after the fact. Once if there were some legal issue happened while you were a faculty member, then HR would come in. But this is there might be some shift now to having HR come in before the hiring even takes place. So it's looking like I might be making an exit from academia, which isn't, the most ideal situation. But I think it's maybe the right move for me, just because I don't think I'll have a lot of control over the hiring committees, and I think I could probably publish my butt off the next year or more, and I'm not sure how much of an impact that would have. I mean, I already have close to 30 papers published, and I only got 3 interviews out of 100 applications, and I could conceivably maybe get 3 or 4 good papers a year, and is that going to give me all those interviews? And even if I do get them, am I going to be blocked at the end by some HR department or something? So I'm sort of in a process of taking control over my future again, because I just feel that I'm at a point of diminishing returns where I could invest as much as I could into publishing and being the best scientist I could, but I don't know if there'd be a whole lot of payoff to that, because I don't think that might actually translate into a job. And so I'm sort of shifting where I'm going to be refocusing on things that I think I might have more control over in the future, which unfortunately would be outside of academia, but I'll still be talking about academic topics, and I don't have a plan.
Making surfboards?
No, so right now my plan is I'm moving back to California. My family's house is in full quarantine, so I'm going to be moving back there. I'm going to be spending 2 weeks in their game room to be quarantined from them. Then my current objective right now is to write a book, and then sort of ride out the recession and pandemic for the next several months to a year, and hopefully release the book, and then emerge afterwards, looking for more sort of scientific journalist positions. I'm also looking to start like an online fitness and nutrition coaching sort of enterprise. Okay. So yeah, lots of different areas I'm going in, but I don't think a lot will change from the perspective of people who are like on Twitter stuff. I'll still be writing about the same stuff I've been talking about. The only thing that changes, I'm probably not going to be an academic scientist anymore. So,
what about? Are you able to talk about what your book might be about?
So yeah, it's probably. So I'm still working on just the full outline of it right now. I've been chatting with a literary agent who someone put me in contact with. It's broadly going to cover a lot of the stuff that I've written in my New Evolution Deniers Quillette piece, my Wall Street Journal. Will probably be a historical section that looks at sort of the sociobiology debates in the 70s and the sort of the Gould postmodern type stuff that went on in the 80s, and in response to the sociobiology and the science wars in the 90s, and maybe a little bit of creationism, intelligent design, new atheism stuff in the mid to late 2000s, and then sort of. So just as like a context for the sort of grievance studies type thing. And then I plan on sort of looking at, this is broadly, could change by the time I come out with it, but looking at how the univariate fallacy, I had a thread on that, which basically is the claim that because certain, like no single trait can absolutely define differences between two groups, that those two groups are social constructs and don't exist. I'll be kind of going over what I went over in my thread on the topic, looking at sex differences in both, just biological sex itself, sex differences in neuroanatomy and personality, and then probably looking at just sort of human population diversity type stuff too. Sort of the claims that we don't like to use the word race because it's so loaded, but the idea we can identify certain population differences based on correlated genes, not linking it to any other types of trait, just saying that there are, identifiable groups that are based on, relatedness in certain areas, and it kind of goes against this current narrative that there's just this doesn't exist at all, that we can't talk about population differences.
Is the, do you have an idea about like the history, the coeval history of science and science denialism? Is that kind of, that seems like what you're talking about? Like there's
Yeah,
always attending to science is always this kind of narrative that tries to bend it to its will, and
yeah. So exactly. So it seems to kind of go back and forth between the sort of more, I was going to say left wing, even though I don't know what that means anymore, but sort of the left wing postmodern type science denialist people, or just reality denial in general. And then you have it coming from sort of the evangelical Christian right that might come, especially when they're coming after, evolution, things like that.
yeah.
And so it's going to be looking at sort of the attacks to science from both the left and right. And so now the current situation we're in is we're back with the whole sort of postmodern attack, which is sort of entrenched itself within the academy now. So it's much harder to root out than say creationism or intelligent design proponents, because they don't really have a foothold inside academia at all. So they can kind of just be ignored, and they don't exert a lot of influence. But now with they're inside the departments, have compared it to sort of like, it's almost like an invasion of like the body snatcher situation, where I'll look around, they all seem like very competent scientists, but then you talk to them like, do you know what biological sex is? And they'll just like, all of a sudden they sprout tentacles, and this is like, oh my god, you're one of them. So
have you thought about like a list of questions to strain out somebody's relationship to reality?
That'd be good to have. It'd be like the Thing, the scene where they're like putting the pin in the blood, trying to go by and see which ones reacts to it. There's got to be something like that for
like an allergy test for reality.
Yeah, something like that. It's like, you've tested positive for reality denial. So
well, what's something about science that you find yourself denying? Do you think like any human being is fully capable of not denying reality? Is there something that like you find yourself like having a hard time with, like some theory or some discipline?
it's hard to say. I'm sure, like, I don't want to put across and say that I'm right about everything. I do my best to sort of curate every belief I have, where I'm perfectly fine of remaining agnostic to things unless I'm pretty sure that like something has met the threshold of evidence. But I'm sure there's things that like I'm not convinced on. Like, I don't know how much this could be considered biology, but I have a hard time believing in things like hypnosis or things like that. Even though very intelligent people tell me that it's a real thing, and that you can be on stage and you can act like you're talking to your mother when it's not. It's like, is this real? It's very like there's like a theatrical version of hypnosis where it's just like, and you're all hypnotized, everyone faints. But then I guess there's a more subtle kind that people are willing to defend. I still have a hard time believing that. Like, I don't know. It's just.
Well, is this because of your staunch free willism, self-determination?
No, I mean, I'm open to suggestion. It just seems, I don't know, there just seems to be sort of like a magical hocus pocus component to like a hypnosis on that level, where you can get people to, like on the count of 3, you'll snap out of it. Maybe it's real. I don't know. I'm very skeptical of it. I don't know if that's would put me in reality denial territory enough. I'm willing to accept it could be real. I'm not going to deny it. But
so there's places where you can feel your skepticism turning up.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I'd have to have people ask me on things for me to. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not totally aware of my own blind spots, I guess. It's hard for me to out myself what I'm in denial about that's true.
What is the Twitter like your experience on Twitter, which has been a rocky road for you, but like I guess pretty fun too. It's a lot of fireworks, right? It's pretty explosive, up down. Yeah. Has that as a platform, as a scientist interacting with the public, how has that shaped you? It's been wild. It's been sort of a major double-edged sword, because in one instance, I live by myself. I'm in the middle of rural Pennsylvania, so not a lot of interactions, and especially now in the whole shutdown, it can be there's not a whole lot of social interactions going on, and so
and even if I had social interactions, most of the people I know are pretty either apolitical. They don't like to talk about sort of the centrist IDW type topics that I might be interested in exploring. And so Twitter's has been a way where I can really find the people who I want to talk about with these things, like, you and the Bo Weingards of the world and the Lee Jussums and those types of people who are just, intelligent people who are willing to speak their mind, who aren't gonna, paint the roses for me. They're going to tell me like it is. Everyone is totally willing to be the single only one in the room standing up against a consensus that they disagree with. And so those are the types of people I like to talk to. So I've been able to find those people, and I've made a lot of great friendships that way. But then also, the hate's been intense at many times, and I've had to sort of adapt in real time. I've never had to deal with anything like that before, and for a while I thought that it doesn't get to me at all. Like, it's okay if people call me a bigot here and there, or a Nazi or whatever. I think for a little while it did sort of get to me, and I think I was feeling myself sort of slip and getting a little depressed. And so I sort of distanced myself a little bit, and I'd start blocking people more, just because, if the first thing you're coming out with me is just like, die transphobe, or just calling me a name, do I really need to ever interact with you again on Twitter? Probably not. So I'm trying to take my time and not check my mentions quite as much. And it's especially since the Wall Street Journal article.
Yeah.
There was something that happened between 15,000 subscribers and 20 that just made the experience so much different. It's just, I don't know what it is. It's just,
in a negative way, or do you feel disconnected from?
I guess it's just more like there's just so much swarming going on to everything that gets posted. Like, whereas I mentioned Zuby had like a Zuby Music. He had a thread where he talked about the different experience that you have on Twitter when you have like 10K, 20K, 50,000 followers, 100,000. And one of the things I mentioned on there was, it seems like when you reach a certain number of Twitter followers, people are just much less willing to treat you as a human. They're more like to treat you as someone that needs to be just taken down.
Yeah, you become a brand, I guess. You become an object.
Yeah. My Twitter experience, when I had maybe, under 10,000, maybe even when I was at 2,000 tweets, I could tweet things and, I would get good feedback from it. I wasn't reaching a massive audience. But now it gets to the point where, like, there's people who are just going to go at me 100% and not give me the least charitable interpretation of anything I'm saying. And it's just, and they're going to tweet it out to their, bazillion followers who are just going to all come after me. So it's definitely, I have to adapt constantly to how I interact with
Have you been interacting with the Corona conversation?
I've only really been paying attention. Like, I've been reading experts on it, but I'm not saying I don't know anything about it. So I really hope that no one would listen to anything I have to say about it, because I don't want people I shouldn't be listened to. Like, no one should listen to me.
Well, so how are you adapting to quarantine then, or lockdown?
Oh, I've worked from home a lot before during this, while I've been here, because a lot of the times if I'm not in the lab doing an active experiment, I can just write from home. So it's not too bad. It is sort of, now that I really can't leave, or if I, only if I absolutely need to, it's a little different than voluntary staying inside. But it's not too bad. I've had to, I guess it hasn't been complete quarantine since I'm selling everything, that I've had some people have to come over just to, take away my desk and things like that. But we still try to do the social distance.
Well, the couch is 6 foot, right? So you can
exactly
carry it from the other side.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Yeah, and it's going to be even more bizarre because I'll be driving across the entire country in the middle of the whole pandemic. So we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Probably get gas and live off of Twinkies and Cheetos and.
I hate driving across. I've done it. This will be the 4th time in the last 6 years I've driven completely across the country. So.
You gonna let that go? You gonna let that be a part of your past after this one, or there's no telling, I guess.
There's no telling. Hopefully, if the types of jobs that I'm applying for, hopefully they're more like online based, where I could potentially do them from anywhere. That would be so ideal, because the thing I hate the most is having to uproot everything and sell everything, and fit everything into my Subaru, and then start somewhere else, and then try to build a life there again. So ideally, I'd be able to choose where I live, and I just want to be able to live somewhere for at least 10 years, at least know where I'm going to be for 10 years, because every 2 to 3 years over the last 12 years, I think I've moved every 2 to 3 years so far, since I can really remember, since I left my parents' house when I was 20 something. So yeah, I'm looking forward to knowing where I'm going to be and actually be able to put roots down and make long-lasting friends. So that's definitely something I'm.
So, are you going to keep at the sex topic on Twitter? Or is there another topic that you think that you're itching for? Because you're in the thick of things with that. I wonder, do you think that there will be any way for it to go forward? You just kind of have to wait for the sea change or somebody to come up with a good argument, or does it feel stuck to you? Does it feel like it's going anywhere?
It feels a little stuck right now, for sure, and probably more stuck because I think there's a temporary unspoken armistice between people now that the coronavirus has taken over. Like, I just noticed there's much less Twitter activity. I'll tweet something that I thought would have gotten more popular before. Like, no one seems to care about any of that stuff going on right now. Everyone's got, understandably, a lot more important things to worry about. So, but it's all going to be waiting there when we get back. They're not going anywhere. I would hope that the conversation has improved by then. I doubt the conversation is going to improve. I think that we might see a shift in sort of the number of people who are speaking out against it, because I think it's the more sunlight it gets, the more people realize how kind of crazy some of the sex denial rhetoric is. So hopefully, even if the conversation is still, I don't see what other points I could be really making. I've made my points. I'm just remaking them at this point. I think they're still important to keep making, because obviously they're going to still make their points, and people in the public need to see the reasonable opposition to these ideas. So I'll keep doing that as long as I need to be. But hopefully we just see a sort of shift in where the power of the conversation is currently residing, which right now I think it's on the other side, just by numbers and outspokenness and pure just how volatile they can be. But I think we're seeing a change. I think there's more people that are sort of speaking up about it now, or less afraid to, because they see other people talking about it. So I'm optimistic. Yeah, the interests I've always been in. I'm sure there'll be. I don't know if I'll be doing this in 5 years, because there's always some new thing that comes up. I thought I was going to be arguing against creationism and intelligent design for my entire life. 10 years ago and that was part of the reason why I got into evolutionary biology in the first place, because I'm an atheist, and I was arguing against creationists, intelligent design people, because in the late 2000s, that was the debate. There were people trying to get sort of intelligent design textbooks in the classroom or taught alongside evolution, and so that was, to me, the battle. That was where science was under attack from. They're still there, but they're much less, I guess, outspoken. I never really come across them. They don't appear to be endangering the science classroom right now. But now the science attack is coming from the other side, and so that's where I'm focused. And who knows where it's going to come from again? But I've just sort of noticed this pattern in my life where, what am I currently interested in? This basically has to do with where the attack is coming from, and what flank do I need to guard at any given time. So I'm sure that'll probably shift several times throughout my entire life. But
Have you been able to reach creationist and intelligent design istas, in the previous incarnation of your science battle?
I had a blog back in the day. There was not as much YouTube going on. There was a little bit. I wasn't involved in that. I was part of an atheist podcast with a group of people. It was called An American Atheist, and we were somewhat popular back in that day, I guess. But
do atheists ever don't just speak to their choir? Do you ever have you seen any like actual movement, or does it just?
Yeah, I mean, I saw people reaching out and attempting to talk to people on the other side back in the New Atheism days, and I see people doing it now. You got like I don't know if you know Rationality Rules or Cosmic Skeptic. Those people, I think they're doing a really great job, and they're constantly going on radio programs of other creationists and doing live debates, and they're very charitable individuals. They're intellectually honest, and they have really good conversations, I think. I'm glad that they're out there doing it, because I always said that I thought New Atheism wasn't so new. It was getting really old. All the main people, they're in their 70s and 80s, and Dawkins had a stroke, and Dennett could have a heart attack any day. He had one already before. Hitchens is gone, and all those. Sam Harris is still not really doing the atheism thing. He's doing other stuff, and so no one was taking their place. And I was just like, we need some new blood to keep arguing, because people. I think you need to constantly kind of keep arguing these same points, because the argument's never won. They just sort of go down for a while, and they resurge every kind of a cyclical basis. So it's good.
What would the point be? Like,
what was that? Sorry.
What are the points that need to constantly be advanced?
I mean, just I guess the standard arguments against God's existence, or like the moral argument, the arguing against Pascal's wager and the Kalam Cosmos, are just I think those need to be sort of ever present. And the second one side just like drops their arms, that's when the other side is gonna advance their troops a little bit more. So I think that it's always important to sort of maintain the debate as being active and never assume that it's completely been won. Because when you let your guard down, that's when they're gonna
swamp you with their faith.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, have you seen parallels between creationisms and the gender ideology faction? Like, are there similar moves that are being made, or is postmodernism a different beast than I guess old school fundamentalist evangelical?
I do see very similarities. I made this comparison before, where in the late 2000s, when you were on YouTube, the whole like someone completely owns or destroys someone, those videos were always like Richard Dawkins destroys creationists. It was always just like the creationists and the intelligent design people were always sort of the ones that were getting owned, getting dunked on. And now that's not what I see. Now I see Ben Shapiro dunks on these types of like social justice activist, postmodern type grievance studies people. Like that has totally shifted, and I do see a very similar, I guess, I don't know what to call it, just a zealousness, or I see very similar ways that they're advancing their arguments of being more just emotionally based, or just I don't know the best way to describe it. And I know James Lindsay had a really great article that was sort of like the postmodern religion. I can't remember the title of it, but it was really long. It was super long, but it did a lot of the parallels between different religions, and how you can interpret some of like the critical left's positions as sort of having parallels to the sort of modern religious ideas, like original sin as having this like white guilt type of thing. There's maybe some of the comparisons might not be direct, but I think there's a lot of comparison. I do think the postmodern left is sort of a religious movement in many ways.
Have you seen them swarm? Have you seen like fundamentalist creationists swarm their enemies, like the social justice advocates do?
No, it's there. So yeah, so I've always said that I preferred arguing with creationists and intelligent design proponents, because with them, we usually agree on the most basic observations of the state of the world when you look around. Like, I can talk to an intelligent design person, and they're going to, understand that male and female are real things. They can, at least a lot of intelligent design people, they'll even look at, they'll accept the fossil record as is, and that life has changed over time. And even if a lot of, even if religious people who deny evolution, at least they identify things how they are today. They just usually propose that maybe there's some sort of spiritual magic going on sort of behind the scenes that is explaining these things, but they don't disagree on what we're looking at. Like, we're looking at something. They just have a different idea of how that came to be, and like, I'll argue with them day and night for that.
So then the present is stable between you two, but the beginnings
Yeah.
and the ends are what's in question, or what's being argued about.
Yeah, they have more of like a supernatural behind the scenes going on to explain what it is.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm not, that doesn't convince me. But when I talk to or debate some of the, and also, sorry, the creationists, they're also not going to call me a bigot or anything like that. You know, they're not making these types of.
Every once in a while, they might suggest that you're damned to an eternity of suffering.
Yes, yeah, they might do that. Yeah,
offhandedly,
for sure. Yeah, but when I speak to these, like, the critical left people, the social justice types, postmodern, we can't even agree on the most basic observation. Like, they don't even agree that there are shared facts to investigate. They think the facts, that the facts aren't shared. The male and female aren't real. And I don't even know how to begin with some of these people, because if we can't even agree on like a phenomena that we're both trying to explain, like, they don't even agree that we're seeing the same phenomena, like as it is, as we're looking at it. So it's almost impossible to even begin. I don't know how to begin with some of these people if we can't just establish that we're looking at something. I just want to give them a piece of paper, like, draw what you see, and just so I can like look at it, and just to make sure, like, just draw what you see, so I can make sure we're seeing the same thing. Because otherwise, it seems to be almost a level of I don't even know how to explain it. They're just complete denial. I don't even know how they can be sincere in their beliefs if they're starting off denying like the most basic observations.
Yeah,
makes any sense.
I guess Lindsay and Pluckrose and Bogosian have been kind of observing those people, or that group. Have you had any observations about that you find useful in the way that you engage with them, or do you just kind of have to do this emoji and then this emoji and then this emoji?
I mean, I try. I guess the only place I really am able to engage with these people are online. I don't have a lot of people in my actual real life that I'm engaging with. I know after my Wall Street Journal article, people in my lab were contacted that a lot of by diversity committees and students, saying that they thought my essay made them feel unsafe because they said it denied the existence of non-binary identities, and and the fact that it was made by a Penn State employee made them feel unsafe and invalid or something. And I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with these people. And people even suggested, like, oh, maybe we could arrange something. And I'd be down. I do worry that I'm just going to show up and it's just going to be, people shouting at me. So if it could be, if I knew what I was walking into, I might be more willing to do it. We'll see. But yeah,
it's so deeply, either sad or offensive that the institution itself has been, or not, even if it's not captured, it capitulates constantly over and over again.
Yeah.
That the HR department is not about. The HR department's already in charge of letting people in. Basically, the HR department is ergo in charge of the conversation within the academy.
Exactly. Yeah. I can't say too much about Penn State. They've actually been really great. They have not contacted me in any way to say that I need to stop doing what I'm doing. I could have had my contract extended. I decided not to because it is, again, a whole, I don't think that's a fruitful area for me to go forward on. But they made it clear that I could be extended, and that my article wouldn't influence their decision to fund me that extra year. So they've been fine. I have no problems with Penn State. They've been great. So, but it's been the other universities that have the chairs when they've talked to me about potentially getting hired, and other people I've talked to just on Twitter saying like, yeah, they've had that experience too of HR sort of coming in beforehand instead of post hoc. But
you're a part of a cohort, and I would include Bo Weingart in this. Now, it's looking for something outside of the academy where you guys can still be academicians or academites, and like there's a world of possibility, but there's no safety net out there. I guess there's some people who've made some headway into like establishing enough little gigs, to make a life out there. But it's kind of a very interesting historical spot that we're in, where the academics that want to be asking, the scientists that want to be asking certain questions have to go outside of the academy to ask those. And
it's almost nearly impossible to submit papers to academic journals if you don't have some sort of university affiliation too. Which is something that's the main thing that I guess I am
sacrificing.
Yeah, sacrificing, because I'm in the process of writing sort of a response to the sex redefined Nature article, because there's been no formal response to that. I'd like to get that out before my contract expires here at Penn State, because I don't think I'd be much less likely to have them even look at it if there's like, who's this? The other person, has a PhD in biology, but they don't have an appointment anywhere, and that's the way it is. I don't agree with it. I think anybody should be able to make these arguments if they have a relevant expertise in a certain field. And there's a possibility. I've talked to some professors who can potentially have me on as they call it, this sort of a soft appointment at a university, where I'm not getting paid anything. And I'm not doing any work for them. I just have a title at a university. So if I were to get funding, because grants need to be funded through universities, so I could have a university to have grants funded through, so it wouldn't cost them anything to have me on, but I would still have a university affiliation. So I'm trying to work out an arrangement like that with some people. But one of them, even though he's majorly on my side, one of my really good friends, a professor, I won't say where he is. But he's worried that he's having my name attached to his lab, even on a soft, unpaid appointment, could give him a lot of flack. So, yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm not sure how that outside academia thing can go. I really hope there can be some change that's able to be happened, or at least people being taken seriously who are not in academia, because it's just be so easy for people to be like, who are these people? This guy's he's got an online fitness and coaching business. So why should we pay attention to him? Even though, we still have publication records and we were doing good science until we decided to leave the field, and there's no reason we can't keep doing it.
It's a brilliant move, though. They don't have to work to discredit you if you don't have any credentials to begin with. It's wonderfully done. They really cinched up that.
Yeah, I'm not optimistic about the state of academia, and I think social media has played a major role in that. Because if you think about how hiring took place before social media for a university, you wrote your papers, they were published somewhere. You applied to a university, you submitted your application that had your name and stuff, but when you Googled them, even if you talk about even before the internet type of thing, which wasn't that long ago, you couldn't Google someone and find out what they did. You would just see their CV.
Yeah.
You might give them a call and fly them out to an interview. But on an interview, you can't ask them questions like, what are your views? What are your political views? What are your, things that we all agree is things we don't want to ask people on interviews, just as you wouldn't ask, are you planning to have children? These are things we all agree are wrong to ask people. And because you just had, the only information you had was their CV, and then, and then when they showed up at the university, how you kind of liked them, you're gonna get more of a diversity of people, because the person you hired, they might be conservative, they might be left wing, you have no idea. But with the advent of the internet and social media now, it's weird because we all still agree that these questions cannot be asked during interviews, but then we somehow have no qualms with obtaining that information overtly just by like, oh, I'm just going to Google them and find out all that information that I was not allowed to ask them during an interview. I can now find out online. And because people obviously, if they see someone, if someone's wearing, maybe they wore a Trump hat, or if, they may have said a political view you disagree with, like that is stuff, it's going to influence people's decision on whether to hire this person, especially if the academy is already pretty left-leaning. And then so you see this sort of shift towards, people self-selecting individuals who more agree with them politically in their departments, and then it makes it even more skewed to the left, and then it's forever this left-wing march in the universities, where now someone like me, now I'm just arguing that biological sex is a real thing, and I consider myself on the left, and even Bo, I mean, he's probably a little more conservative than me on some things, but he's by no means like a right-winger. Now we're too right-wing for a lot of departments now.
Not worth the risk.
Yeah, and so it's really, I do worry that they've been captured, and I think we need to move to save sort of the university, keep it from doing that. I don't know any way to get around it besides something like anonymous applications, where you don't even have your papers. You just say like, here's your publications would have to be sort of like, here's the journal it got accepted in, here's the journal's impact factor, here's how many citations I have, here's my H index, all the things that should matter for hiring somebody, but you're going to be less able to hire like the exact type of scientist. Like, we're hiring a plant person or a mammal person, but you're not going to know who they are or anything else. Maybe not it's better than what we have now, I think.
It makes me think of Jonathan Haidt's Truth University, Social Justice University, Christian University talk. That's a few years old now, but
I'm not sure if I've seen that, but
it's really, really good. It's a really, really good one. I think it's classic. But it seems that the American Academy, broadly speaking, hasn't been able to quarantine itself from certain ideas. Like the certain ideas have taken over the whole thing. So there's no place left for straight, honest, risky question asking science, or there's less and less room for that, and because there's more and more risk factor, because every academy has an HR department. They're all hiring their diversity, equity, inclusive excellence officers now, which they're all adopting a stance that our job is to keep the students safe. Our job is to coddle the students. Like all this entire set of ideas is not quarantine at all. It's taken over the entire. It seems like it's taken over the majority of it, and that there's no last bastions of it doesn't matter. This is the School of Hard Knocks University, the Academy of Dangerous Ideas that we're going to pursue, and we're going to shelter. We're going to shelter not the feelings, but the ability to engage in discourse in a certain way that'll lead to truth rather than lead to I guess political outcomes that we want.
I think it's been a dangerous shift, especially because the administrators are usually more skewed to the left than the faculty in most instances. So now when you put those people at the helm and they're deciding, they're able to just go against the wishes of the faculty hiring decision. I know you had in Berkeley now, like the diversity statement is used as like the first thing in the math and physics departments, where like we're really gonna, like how good would have Einstein's diversity statement would have been? Maybe not that good. I can't imagine him caring all that much about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Are we really going to want to force Einstein to incorporate social justice into his research on the speed of light? It just seems bizarre that we would have this component as not even just a weighted factor. Seems bizarre to me, but as the primary first method that you screen people, where if you score below a 4 out of 6 on this, like, we're only getting people that are scoring a 5 or a 6 on their diversity statements. That is just insane to me. And I had this experience when I was applying, because I applied to so many universities this last year. In most states, their they require you to submit like your CV, your cover letter, a teaching philosophy statement, a research statement, and then some of them also wanted like a diversity statement. Just they didn't give you a rubric. They didn't say how they were going to grade them. Just submit a diversity statement. And it's like, okay, I submitted mine and everything like that. But without fail, every time you go, when a university application came on for any, the UC system in California or any California university, I was just so exhausted to look at their application process, because they want all the same stuff, but then they don't want you just to upload your diversity statement that you've already written that you can just change, the university you're submitting it to. Some of them say like, you need to read our like diversity mission document. It's a PDF, and we need you to write like a 2-page document that describes how your research is going to address like these specific things to our statement. And it's just like the chances of anybody getting any academic job they apply for is very low. And so you're going to take my entire day to address these points, on my application, just so I can submit it where I'm going to have a fraction of a percent of them ever going to even hear back from you. It's like I just didn't apply to so many California jobs. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's just not applying to some of these jobs because of the bar of entry of what you need to do to apply, just the diversity requirements. Wow. We're just out of control. So
it seems like that's another brilliant tactic. Just a brilliant tactic. There was a modification that I made of a cliche about the only way to, for how's it go? In order for evil to triumph, all good men have to do is not show up to countless bureaucratic meetings. Like that's all it takes. So now all you have to do is not apply to these things for it to go even further. They've made they've weighted it so well. They've done such a great job with what end goal, I guess, to just continually eat up taxpayer dollars and poop out worthless, I guess, degrees and research papers. And
yes, yeah. I mean, at some point, there has to be some sort of
mechanism.
Chickens coming home to roost thing. I mean, because you don't just water down the mental output of your department that way and still be as productive and have your reputation still stick around. I mean, I just can't imagine any other university who's going to just like take the opposite tactic and say like, no, we just want the best applicants. Like they're gonna kick ass. They're gonna destroy in terms of productivity and their discoveries and the Nobel Prizes that are being won. Like that's there's going to be a lag time, but I just can't imagine places like Berkeley and UCLA who are doing these types of things, Berkeley especially. I just can't imagine 10 years from now, after these hiring processes are going and they've changed the faces of everyone, their entire staff. I can't see them still being number one in terms of output and how much they're contributing. Just given the fact that they do have such a high bar of entry, not on academics, what is what it should be, but the high bar of entry on anything but academics, just how your diversity, equity, and inclusion statements.
So you're sacrificing, I guess, credibility, and you might find some workarounds by not going the academic route. But you could still probably teach online. You can still probably, but you can't give credit online unless maybe you could figure out a deal with another university. So I guess you could probably reassemble outside of the academy with some loss of, I guess, stability, tenure. You just kind of have to give up that. If that was ever on the table for somebody in your generation, you could probably cobble together a model of still doing the same thing, teaching, producing, writing, and I guess living on top of that outside of these legacy institutions.
Yeah, I'd like to, and I'd like to see. I can also imagine sort of more open-minded, free speech universities taking on some of these positions in response to some of the things going on. I do think there's going to be a shift. I think there has to be at some point. I might have missed the boat for that, but I'd still be willing to apply to any of those types of universities. Or until then, I would like to do some online teaching. I'll maybe try to do some adjunct too here and there, not full time, but I do I do love teaching too, and that's one sad aspect of potentially leaving academia is that, like, I won't be able to teach students and have classes and be a mentor anymore. Where there are things that I really really enjoyed doing. So I might just sort of try to get that teaching aspect by trying to adjunct, one class per term or a couple terms or something, just so I can get that teaching itch scratched, because I really enjoy doing that so much. Yeah.
And I guess research it's going to take a hit too. You can't do field research anymore because you need funding for that, right?
Yeah. So that's the main thing. You get a few years without publishing papers. So I'd be limiting myself to out of like R1 universities, like the major research universities. As long as if I keep doing some teaching, though, I could still apply to some liberal arts colleges that are more teaching or completely teaching focused. That's still an ideal situation. I would instantly take a job at a teaching university if, to teach full time. That's something I'd love to, because I can teach full time. I could still on the side write if I need to. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting year given the whole depression, recession, and everything. So I'm not sure how much hiring is going to be going on, but
we'll
see how that turns out.
See how it shakes out.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on again. I'm glad I got one more Pennsylvania interview with you.
Yeah. It's about a year since we did the last one. How's your bursitis doing? I know you talked about having
I have this residual problem. They gave me some hormone and my body's been aching for like the last month. I have swelling in my joints and I'm just aching all the time. It's kind of a pain in the ass.
It's rough.
Well, pain just everywhere. It's just like this dispersed pain. I don't understand. Maybe I'm
not
just
coronavirus. You're good. It's not like
no. This year's been really shitty with health. I mean, I had like a major flu where I just couldn't move for about 4 days. I was just like totally like locked in, and so I hope I don't have to get the corona, but I don't know how the math works out. Probably have to get it. Maybe I'll get an asymptomatic variant.
Yeah, I've had like a light cough. My voice is a little raspy now just because I've had over the last couple of days just a very light cough. Just a slight stuffy nose, but it hasn't progressed then. I have not had a temperature, and I've just been like monitoring. I was like, what's going on? But nothing. It's. I think it was worse yesterday, and I'm feeling pretty good today. I think it's.
Yeah.
I mean, they say that 9 out of 10 people who present with coronavirus symptoms end up testing negative for it. So, and it is flu season and cold season, so I think it's just to have a normal, boring cold.
Yeah. Well, moving's gonna is kind of stressful, so you're going to have to just keep on top of that, right? Pop your C's and your D's and maybe some E vitamins. And
yeah, definitely. It's going to be a nuts few weeks here driving across the country. But
when's your departure date?
There's no set time. It's basically as soon as I'm able to get everything sold, I'm just going to hit the road as soon as I possibly can. There's no point in hanging around any longer than I need to, especially if I sell all my furniture, I'm going to be quarantined, and so I have to sit on the floor in the middle of a room. Like, I'm not going to. That sounds miserable. So no. As soon as everything's gone, I'm gone. So if anybody out there wants to buy, this will air much later, but I got fake plants for sale.
All right, man. Good luck. Sorry. Thank you.
I'm enjoying all your stuff you've been doing, the interviews, your sex, gender, and transition stuff. It's excellent.
It's been great. Met a lot of really great people.
Part of what I'm planning on doing in this next year of quarantine is sort of doing some of my own interviews. There's people I would like to interview as well. Just for me, because there's people's brains I'd like to pick, and I think I'd be able to probably get some people on who people might know, and then I'll publish it just on a YouTube channel just because, hey, why not? But I think it'd be interesting I haven't seen you give many interviews. I know you were on Megan Murphy's interview, but a podcast recently, right?
Yeah.
And that was useful. But I'd like to get you on at some point to.
Oh yeah.
Your experience, because I think you have a treasure trove of knowledge now, having talked to so many individuals in your gender series, that you might have a very valuable perspective, probably.
I have a postmodern mind. I really do. I think in terms of narrative. My brain my brain relates to facts in a way where they're never stable. Like I can never just remember things. Like I have to always but I can remember people and I can remember narratives and stories and I can operate on that postmodern level. So and I was going full gun with postmodernism until I saw at Evergreen. I'm like, oh no 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 no. You know, like this isn't how this isn't. You can't replace the reality with postmodernism. You can only dance on top of reality with postmodernism. Like that's the relationship. And there was like the pyramid got flipped over, and then it got infected with just raw human tribalistic madness, you know, like without any structures. You just have a bunch of 2-year-olds knocking over the tower, and you don't have a tower anymore, right? You don't even have any blocks anymore.
Yeah. But your evergreen stuff, and yeah, that's all very important work. I'm glad you're out there doing it.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, Colin.
Awesome. Well, let's do this again at some point. Maybe a year from now, we'll have a yearly update. Let's see what I'm doing.
Well, yeah, just survive well. Good luck with your transition across the continent.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll probably be tweeting about my journeys. We'll see how it goes.
I'll keep abreast, and I'll plug everybody. I'll plug your Twitter in so everybody can follow your adventures, your wacky adventures. Like it feels like a Stephen King novel you're embarking on, like The Stand. You know,
it's going to be so less thrilling than that because I'm going to be doing 10-hour drives every day probably, and there's going to be no traffic and no people anywhere because everyone's quarantined. So it's going to be a nightmare 4-day drive. Oh my god!
You can do it. We believe in you.
I've done it before. I'll do it again.
All right, man. Well, have a good day.
Hope you stay safe.
You too, man.
Keep it up, man. I'll talk to you later.
Ciao. Congratulations for reaching the end of the podcast. If you enjoyed this product, consider donating to this channel via paypal.me/Benjamin Boyce or joining me on Patreon. Also follow me on Twitter at Benjamin A. Boyce. Have a good night.